So we have with us tonight Rebecca Baylog, who is a land steward volunteer. So she's just kind of in the background and she'll be helping with record and things like that. But if something goes wrong with my technology and another person is kind of becomes the moderator, that will be Rebecca. So she's backing me up. So this is brought to you tonight by our Land Steward Community Education Series, which is put together by a volunteer group of land stewards. We reach out to our community and find out what people want to learn about. We work on finding presenters, or sometimes people offer that they have things that they would like to share, and we bring them in. If you would like to hear about upcoming classes, you can just Google OSU Land Stewards, go to our webpage, and there's a subscribe button right there, and that is the list for our list to hear about upcoming land steward events. So there's no spam that comes over that, just kind of the classes and opportunities that are coming up through the program. Okay, next, there we go. So wanted to mention a few. So if you are interested in what's coming up, so tonight we have weed control for landowners, and then there are a few other things here that are brought to us by some of our program partners, the burn programs and small farm series. But I really wanted to highlight down here at the bottom, April 9th, we have the Sustainable Living series that we have put together, and I'm going to say a couple more words about that. But landscaping for water conservation is coming up, and there's another one too that our master gardeners are hosting, but I'll say a couple more words about that in a moment. And I also really wanted to mention that this April we will be having our hybrid online land steward course. So this is our land steward training, but it's a hybrid online field. So it will be 9 online modules over the course of 9 weeks, and it includes an optional in-person introduction or a Zoom introduction, and optional 2 field days that kind of encompass all of the natural resource topics. So if you've been wanting to partake in the land steward field training, but you don't quite have the time to do that, this is a great opportunity to participate with the hybrid online program. And if you go to our website, again, you can find out more about that. So a few more words about our Sustainable Living series. This is really something I'm very excited about. We've been wanting to kind of put together something like what we do for the Land Steward program, which is really focused on rural land for folks that might be living anywhere in an urban context. You don't have to own land to be a land steward in our program, but a lot of people do own their land, but you might be a renter in town, and you just want to have ideas about sustainable living and maybe have some accountability features with it. We aren't doing a whole plan, but we're partnering with our Master Gardener program and the Jackson Soil and Water Conservation to bring kind of an ongoing series of classes about building a better future for all of us. And we have a little feature within them where you can create an action list and kind of track yourself and how well you're doing on making choices for sustainable living. So this is going to be a fun thing. So what's coming up next is Lawns to Meadows, and our Master Gardener program is hosting that one. And that is coming right up March 26th. And then on April 9th, we have Landscaping for Water Conservation. So watch for those under that Sustainable Living series with that lovely little sunflower banner there. Okay, with that, I get to introduce one of my favorite partners in the sphere of people that are working to make the world better, Kyle Strauss. I have so much respect for him. He is the founder of Strauss Ecological Services, specializing in habitat restoration, noxious weed control, and wildlife photography. He frequently collaborates with government agencies and local nonprofit organizations to provide the least harmful and most effective methods of managing wild spaces, as well as private land holdings. Kyle is familiar with many methods of weed control and is a licensed herbicide applicator. So again, as I said, I love working with Kyle. He's a really good educator and handles a complicated topic with things that a lot of people don't want to face with a lot of grace and intelligence. And he's going to share what he knows with us this evening. So with that, I will stop my share and turn it over to you, Kyle.
Well, thank you. Appreciate the kind words there. I've got a lot of slides to go over, so I'm just going to jump right into it and hit my share screen. And hopefully folks are seeing that. Am I unmuted? There. Now can you hear me?
You are unmuted, but we're seeing you need to switch the display up at the top there. Display settings, swap over to show the presenter. we're seeing the notes version.
Oh, okay. Let me.
So if you just go up to the top of your screen where it says display settings, top left, and it's a drop down, and you should just be able to swap, and then that should fix it if you can do
No,
that.
it's not letting me do that. Here, let me stop it.
Okay.
Go back into it. Let's try again. How's that?
Perfect.
All right.
Yes, there we go. Yep, looks
Well,
good.
I will jump right into it. Thanks for the introduction, Rachel. My business that I started in 2013 is Strauss Ecological Services. And what I'm basically going to go over today are a few things, a little introduction about why I'm into this line of work. Integrated pest management, we'll just do an overview of the basic different methods of noxious weed control. And then we're going to get into some specifics about a whole list of weeds that you see here. So hopefully some of this information is useful for you and your lands. But first, I want to go way back. And well, before I do that, I'm going to tell you, I'm getting out of the time of year when I do tree planting, do native tree and shrub installation during the winter time, but it's now springtime. So I'm getting into noxious weed control. And these are some of the ones that are kind of the bread and butter of my business. So I'm doing a lot of that stuff now that spring has sprung and some of the weeds are up. But I want to tell you how I got to know about some of these weeds and go way back. 20 some odd years ago in the greater Portland area, when I started volunteering with an AmeriCorps program, which allowed me to pull English ivy and Scotch broom from meadows. And it's kind of serendipitous that I'm talking to a group of land stewards here because on my one brief appearance on Oregon Field Guide, I got to say this.
Scotch broom. Oh, I love this type of work. It's kind of weedy Mother Nature. You feel like a land steward.
So the land steward, this is where I got my start, is removing
Awesome.
English ivy from a nature preserve in the Portland area. Scotch broom, which is what I was doing in that video, was another invasive species that was taking over meadow habitats. And I parlayed that experience with the AmeriCorps, the Northwest Service Academy out of Portland, into a part-time job with the Nature Conservancy, which is a worldwide conservation organization. And they had a lot of nature preserves in the Portland area. And so I started learning about land stewardship with them, how to collect data, and learn about invasive species control. I want to spend 3 or 4 minutes telling you about Japanese knotweed, because this is the plant that really got me going on integrated pest management and learning a bunch of different methods for dealing with this particular exotic ornamental species, which used to be legal to sell until the mid-90s when the state of Oregon put it on the quarantine list. It escapes cultivation, it escapes out of backyards, and especially if somebody lives along a creek or a riverway, it can jump out. And you can see this is the Snoqualmie River up in Washington. Small bits and pieces of this plant can break off and clone itself and basically spread. Even a fragment as small as this 1-inch little piece of the rhizome or the root network will start to form roots and new shoots and leaves if it lands in some wet sand or mud. We found that even branches that broke off will do the same thing. So once this plant gets into a riverway that floods, all of a sudden one Japanese knotweed patch can turn into dozens, can turn into hundreds and thousands. So we found this growing along the Sandy River. And looking at other rivers around Western Oregon and Washington, we found out that it's a really huge problem. It really takes over. This is the last known photograph of my coworker who we told to go to the back of the patch, and we never saw him again. The big problem with this is that it crowds out native riparian species, the trees that we want to see along our rivers, such as alders and cottonwoods and willows, can't compete with the fast-growing Japanese knotweed in its native habitat in Japan and China. It grows alongside bamboo and other fast-growing species, so it grows very rapidly in the spring, has these big wide leaves, and can shade out and outcompete our native trees. And over time, that is a problem for our rivers and for the inhabitants of the rivers, because without trees growing much taller than the knotweed can, we have less shade in the water, and the water temperature goes up, and that's bad for salmon, among other species. We found out that mowing it actually can cause that cloning experience to happen. So mowing it can cause many fragments to become new patches all on their own. Tried covering it with different materials, and when that happens, the plant is often strong enough to just go and find the edge and pop up from there. Plastic wasn't good enough to stop it. It can actually grow through blacktop, which we saw here. It can grow through cracks in the sidewalk. It can even grow through brick walls. It's a very strong, very formidable plant. We tried digging it out and found out that rhizomes, the root network, can go very deep. We got this one, we dug about 6 feet through the sand, and this one broke off. We didn't even hit the bottom of that. So we found out that that's not really a feasible way for digging out in most patches. So we set up a large-scale experiment with a variety of different approaches, 51 patches. We tried a few different sprays, and I'm just going to sort of give you the fast version of this. This graph basically shows control. The reduction in stem number goes up, and those 2 different herbicides were showing pretty decent control. Towards the right side of the graph, you see manual cutting, where we were cutting these patches every 2 weeks throughout the summer, and we were seeing some reduction, but some of those purple bars that are going down were actually showing increases in the number of stems. You'd cut 1 stem, and 2 smaller ones would often take its place. So in 2003, I believe this method of stem injection was invented, and we tried that out. This method puts a small amount of herbicide into those hollow stems of Japanese knotweed, which is a cross section you can see here. The small amount of herbicide then goes down into the rhizome of the root network and can kill the plant that way. The manufacturers of this said that you needed to do 5 milliliters of the approved herbicide for that. And we thought, well, let's set up an experiment, see if we can get away with doing less, because obviously less chemical, the better for the environment. So we set up another controlled experiment with 5 mils, 3 mils, and 1.5. And I've got some before and after pictures here. There's after the injection, and here's a year later. So that method worked very well for killing it. And we found that there was not a huge difference between the smaller amounts and the fully 5 mil recommendations. So again, science was and monitoring was informing our experience there. I helped write some papers on knotweed control, and it was kind of my introduction to the world of invasive species, and got a crash course in noxious weed control and integrated pest management. So after leaving Portland and coming down to Southern Oregon, I got involved with the cooperative weed management area. We call those the CWMAs. That's basically just a network of organizations and individuals who help spread information about invasive species and noxious weed control. So we'd try to get stories in the newspaper about weeds of the area that people should be keeping an eye out for. You can find more about the CWMAs at rogueweeds.info. And after my position with the Nature Conservancy, the program I was running ended, I started my business, Strauss Ecological Services. And as Rachel mentioned, I do noxious weed control. I use a variety of different methods. I work with private landowners, but a lot of work with agencies and nonprofits throughout Josephine and Jackson County, and a little bit down in Curry County occasionally, and sometimes up in Douglas County. So just to recap of what we're going to cover here, the IPM review is going to go over prevention. We're also going to talk about monitoring, the different types of control methods, biological, cultural, and physical. We're going to go over careful use of herbicides. And then we're going to get into a whole bunch of different weeds and the IPM approaches for the list of weeds that you'll read there. And we'll go through those slides later. So we'll go into great detail about those. If you do have questions that come up during this, you can put those in the chat. Rachel can jump in and interrupt me if I'm not seeing that. And I'll make sure that there's time at the end after we talk a little bit about native plants as well, because native plants are great replacements for weeds. But if questions come up during the presentation, just put them in the chat. So I'm not going to read this long definition integrated pest management, but this is basically, it runs the whole gamut of different approaches for controlling different pests. And we're obviously going to talk just about weeds here today. But I made this graphic here to kind of think of it this way, that the basics of it are there's cultural methods, there's biological methods, there's physical methods and chemical methods. But the other basics are involved in prevention, and then monitoring should be informing your decision-making as you go throughout the processes. What that really means is you're mowing or you're spraying or you're covering or you're burning or you're cutting. Those are the different things, and we're going to talk about a lot of these in detail. So preventative cultural practices really just means maintaining a healthy environment so that you avoid the opportunity for noxious weeds to get a foothold. Weeds often take advantage of disturbance. So trying to avoid disturbances on your land is a good way to not allow species to get invasive in the first place. You don't want to bring them in or track them in. Once you do have weeds, though, and I'm guessing most of you do because you're signed up for this talk, you need to think about what are your goals. Can you eradicate the species that's on your land? Is it just something that you need to control and knock back? So setting reasonable goals is an important thing to set long-term goals as well as short-term. Monitoring is what we're going to talk about, and informing your decision-making as you go along. Mechanical controls really should be your first step. This is your pulling and your cutting, things that we tried with Japanese knotweed. But we found that the more we cut, the more it would often grow. So then we had to go to other methods. We could try to consider biological controls. These are natural processes that provide control. I'll talk a little bit about those more in detail. And then we'll have a section to talk about chemical controls, which is the safe use of herbicides. And these should really be the last resort. You want to go through your other options first before you bring out the chemicals. So prevention, I mentioned avoiding disturbance, but you also don't want to be the vector that brings weeds onto your property. So making sure that you're not bringing seeds in from other places that you go visit. So it means cleaning your boots and your shoes and your tires, your vehicles. It also means aquatics can come in that way too. So cleaning your boats and your gear, those prickly seed heads in the upper left corner are puncture vine, and we'll be talking about that one later. That one's a real easy one to bring into your property because it sticks to the bottoms of your shoes and tires. So prevention is something that should be practiced always. I also want to talk about early detection, rapid response. And this is the next best thing to prevention. It's being able to identify plants on your landscape so that if you recognize a weed, hopefully you recognize it early when you just have a small population before it becomes large and much harder to deal with. There's a graph here that shows how this works out. At the bottom left, you've got an introduction. And as time goes on, which is the bottom right, the more area becomes infested as you go up the graph, up the chart there. So if you're able to detect things lower down in this graph, you're more likely going to be able to remove those weeds before they become overcome and take up too much area, where it becomes not only labor intensive, but expensive and difficult to control. So learning your weeds, knowing your vegetation helps you detect things earlier on this curve. So if you got a couple star thistle plants, yank them out. Otherwise, you might end up with a whole pasture full, or in the case of that bottom right picture, I think that's from Hell's Canyon over by the Oregon-Idaho border, where it's just entire hillsides full of yellow star thistle, and that's obviously very difficult to control. So I just really want to preach early detection, rapid response. I think it's the best way, most cost-effective way at dealing with weeds before they become a huge problem. Pop quiz. I don't know if Rachel told you there's going to be a quiz, but which one of these popular garden plants is also considered an invasive weed? We don't need you to unmute. I'm just going to show you the answer here in 1 second. If you guessed D or E, all of the above, you are right. Each one of these started off as an ornamental species that was at one time legally sold in nurseries. But since has gone on the Oregon noxious weed list, meaning that the state of Oregon Department of Agriculture realized that it was problematic, would not stay where it's planted, or would somehow spread outside of planted and manicured areas into wild and natural areas. So this is another way that we invite invasive species to get started. Is we invite them in, we purchase them and plant them. So make sure that you're not doing that. And I just like to remind people that ornamental plants from different parts of the world really aren't part of the food chain here locally. Our insects and our other animals have not evolved with them. So a lot of times if you bring a plant over from Asia or Europe or some other part of the world and you're putting it in your yard, it might look really pretty, but it's really not part of the food chain. It's more just a decoration. So that's from this cool website here, this jumpstartnature.com. If you want some information about native alternative plants instead of some of the popular ornamentals that are sold in a lot of nurseries, this Garden Smart booklet is a good way to go. And those websites there are where you can find it. You can also just Google Garden Smart Oregon, and it should come up, but those are printed up in Portland. I see the Oregon State Sea Grant also has some printed up. I mentioned Oregon Department of Agriculture. The ODA is the government agency that decides which species should be listed as noxious weeds. And there are different lists. So there's an A list and there's a B list. The A list are the highest priority species. These would be examples like kudzu, which has taken over the southeastern United States. It's a huge problem there. There's only been a couple of small kudzu outbreaks in Oregon because it's an A-listed weed. If somebody spots it and reports it, state of Oregon Department of Ag will jump on that right away. It's a top priority to get rid of that before it can get itself established. So most of the weeds are B-listed weeds, and that's primarily what I'm going to be talking about here today is B-listed weeds. And if you go to the Oregon Department of Ag Noxious Weed Profile website, you can find the list. And when you click on one of these, this is what the page looks like. This is an example of spiny cocklebur. It tells you at the top there that it's a B-rated weed. Shows you a map of the state where it's been reported and located. It's got a few pictures to help you identify it and a description about it. So that's a good resource for finding out more information if you've got a A or B rated weed on your land. I should also point out that not all cockleburs are technically non-native invasive species. This species of xanthium, or this type of cocklebur, is actually a native species. It still has those Velcro seed heads, which are kind of annoying and can spread, and it can act weedy, and it's really up to you if you decide that it's a weed on your property. But just note that some plants can act like weeds, but they are technically native to our region. I've heard that about some people see this honeysuckle and it's climbing up over the top of everything and it's vining up things. Well, it's actually a native vine. And in this case, I actually like honeysuckle. It's really good. The hummingbirds really like that one. So not all vines that climb up and over things are necessarily noxious weeds. You see that sometimes with Oregon manroot or Oregon cucumber. I've also heard this one called manroot. It has a very large root, which is how it got that name. And it's another vine that crawls over things. Even though it's called Oregon cucumber, I should mention that it's not edible, but it is a native vine. And just want to point that out. The other weed that I get asked, well, not weed, it's a native vine that I get asked about is the wild California grape, the one that has long vines that often crawl up trees, much in the way that English ivy can. And it might actually harm some trees. It acts kind of weedy, but it is, once again, a native species. And that decision's up to you whether or not you feel like it's problematic and might need to be dealt with. If you feel like it's overhauling the tree and is there's too much of it, then you might make that decision to cut that one back. But just wanted to have that brief discussion about not all weeds are necessarily from another part of the world, and not all natives are weeds. So you've got weeds. What are you going to do about it? So it's time to take action. So you need to do some homework. You need to figure out what kind of weed you have. Is this an annual weed that grows up in 1 year cycle? Starts from seed each year. You have a biennial that is a 2-year weed. The first year, a rosette often comes out. The second year, you've got a bolted plant that then goes to seed. Or are you dealing with a long-lived perennial? A lot of times these are the woody species that can live multiple years. And a lot of times these are a little bit harder to kill. So get to know your weed. There's the broadleaf, the grasses, the sedges. Do you have an aquatic? There's a lot of different options with plants. So do some research, get to know what type of weed it is you're dealing with. Then I'll help fill in your next steps. You also need to know what kind of habitat you're dealing with. Are we dealing with savannas or meadows, pastures? Is this forested land? Are you dealing with riparian areas, which are areas along creeks or rivers or wetlands? So getting to know the weed, getting to know the habitat are really the first steps before you start planning out your course of action. There's a whole host of other things, soil types, hydrology, fire intervals. There's a lot that goes into this. So a lot of baseline research before you get into it. Knowing how the weed spreads, if it's something that drops seeds, you know that your goal would be to get it before that happens. Are you dealing with some sort of Japanese knotweed type plant where the rhizomes run out or get spread in floods or other types of events and can clone itself? Are you dealing with a small occupation, or you got several acres of whatever your weed is? You want to find out if you can achieve your results with the different combinations of options that we talked about in the IPM wheel. So it's good to ask others who have experience. Coming to a talk like this is one way to do it, but there's a ton of information on the internet. I'm going to be shouting out a whole bunch of different websites, and it's up to you to gauge how much weight you want to give to those websites. You want to consider the source. Is this just some person who you don't know who made a Facebook comment that may or may not know what they're talking about? Or is this from a university study that spent years of research looking into this? I try to get my information from a variety of sources. And I think university websites or government websites are often ones that are peer-reviewed, vetted information that's been tested and true. OSU Extension Service, as you probably know, since you're at this talk, is a great resource for this. So the website here, I just pulled up an example of their article about blackberry control. And I would definitely recommend going to the OSU website for more information about a lot of things. It can be one of the first places you check out. They've got information about safe use of herbicides. So might want to bookmark some of these pages and check them out for future reference. This specific Northwest Management Handbook, pnwhandbooks.org, is a book that's full of information, but it's also available as a PDF online. So if you put in a search function for that, you could probably find that, download that to your computer, and have that as a reference. I'm going to sort of go through, I got a lot of websites to shout out, so I'm going to go through these kind of quick. And if you're not screenshotting or snapping a picture with your phone, I think this talk will be available on YouTube for a little while, so you can go back and pause it. University of California system has a lot of really good information on their IPM website. IPM at ucanr.edu is the sort of homepage for a lot of information. The UC Davis campus in particular has a lot of good stuff. And this is one of their guides where they've got a lot of information about different types of herbicides here. It tells you which kind of weeds those herbicides will control. It gives you a lot of information there. The UC Davis Center is WRIC, so the Weed Research and Information Center at ucdavis.edu. is another one of these great websites that's got long lists of different weeds, ones that you'll find in our region, because Davis is not that far down across the border in California there. So I want to shout out the UC Davis WRIC website for more information, because they can get into a ton of detail that we're not going to be able to have enough time here tonight in this talk. This is just an example of what their pages look like. It's a lot like ODA's page. This is their spiny cockleburr write-up. Once you've seen the pictures and the descriptions, it has the different IPM methods, basically. This is what you look to for mechanical. This is what cultural methods are available, what biological methods might be available. And then it goes into the chemical control methods if you decide that you want to try using herbicides. So it'll tell you the different products and recommendations for that. So WRIC at ucdavis.edu. Invasive.org is I believe based out of the University of Georgia, but it's a really huge website with tons of information about invasive species, not just plants, but it runs the whole gamut. So that's a neat one to check out for lots of invasive info. And the USDA invasive species info.gov is USDA's website for tons of information on invasive species. So lots of information's out there on the web. And now that you've heard about some of those sites, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the ones that I know. Oh, I want to shout out iNaturalist too, because this is a really good one too, because if you're not even sure what plant that you have, you might have something that you don't know if it's a weed, you don't know if it's a native. If you haven't checked out iNaturalist, it's a real cool app. You can put it on your phone. You just snap a picture of what you're looking at, post it. You don't have to know what it is. Odds are that somebody will notice your photo who's a regional local expert, and they can say, oh, I know what that is. That's this species. And then you'll know. So this iNaturalist app has recordings of all the users all around the world, but there's tons of observations, and it doesn't have to be weeds. It doesn't have to be natives. It's plants and animals and fungi and the whole thing. So iNaturalist is a good way to just post a picture. Maybe somebody can tell you what you're looking at. All right, so it's time to take action. You've done some of your research. Now, what are your next steps? You look to the wheel of IPM, and let's start with some cultural methods. So grazing. Some of you might have grazing animals. Grazers are a really good way to control weeds. Goats are fantastic at this. They eat weeds, but they also eat lots of other things, including your natives or your desirables. So keep that in mind. You might need to fence them into the area where you want their help munching the invasive weeds. Just one other mention about cultural control and grazing is that the picture on the right there with the huge head of cattle, dozens of head there, you can see that they've munched a lot of the grass, and now there's disturbance and there's open available soil there for weed seeds to get established. It's better to graze fewer animals and have healthier grass in your pastures to avoid that opportunity for weeds to get in there and get established. So grazing is a really good tool, especially for rangeland weeds, open pastures and meadows and things like that. But you don't want to overdo it, because you can exacerbate the problem and make things a lot worse too. I'm only briefly going to talk about burning because it's not often realistic for a lot of us. And I was glad to see that Rachel's got some stuff on your agenda here coming up in April, where it sounds like you can learn more about prescribed burning. But burning is an awesome cultural control method. A lot of our habitats around the region were burned for millennia by the tribes that lived here before us. And it's a great way to, especially for grasslands, to clear out the old thatch. And a lot of the bunch grasses and natives have evolved with fire over the years, so they do well. But it can be also used as a tool to get rid of invasives. I will shout out the Rogue Valley PBA, not the Pro Bowling Association, it's the Prescribed Burn Association. They've got a really cool website that I'm showing you here. And if prescribed burning is something that you want to learn more about, or you think maybe it's something I could do on my land if I had more help, you want to check them out. And they have occasional workshops, and they might be able to collaborate with you and get some of their partners involved in helping you achieve a prescribed burn. So Rogue Belly PBA. Biocontrol. This is using other organisms to control weeds. And State of Oregon Department of Ag has this really cool brochure, which I'm sure it's really hard to see the details on here, so you got to check it out on the website. But there's a lot of different agents that have been used and introduced over the years. In Oregon, the cinnabar moth has been used to control tansy ragwort. Tansy ragwort used to be very common in a lot of meadows and pastures throughout the area for many, many years. And in 1960, this biocontrol insect, this cinnabar moth, and the caterpillars really munch it down. And nowadays, you don't see a lot of tansy ragwort, in part thanks to the successful biocontrol there. Hopefully the yellow star thistle weevil is just as successful if we give it enough time. It was only introduced in the 90s. And sometimes if you check out yellow star thistle flower, you'll see some of these weevils in there. They're in there munching away at the seeds. So they reduce the amount of seeds that some of these star thistle plants can put out. So they don't outright eliminate it, but they slow down the spread of that. So there's a lot of different biocontrol agents out there. Not all of them are official introductions by the state agencies. I'm noticing a Scotch broom gall mite that is an unofficial biocontrol release. It's out there. These little mites are creating these galls on Scotch broom, and they often slow down the growth of Scotch broom. In some cases, they can kill some plants. So they're not all sanctioned releases. Joel Price is the entomologist with the ODA, and this is him smiling next to a patch of a type of aphid, or technically a psyllid, that attacks Japanese knotweed that was finally approved, I think, in 2022, I want to say. Back when I was dealing with Japanese knotweed in 2000, 2001, the early 2000s, this was my dream that someday there'd be a biocontrol that we could release that would help. And it took about 20 years, probably more, of research before the powers that be were comfortable releasing it. So they tested out on other plants to make sure that it will only attack the target organism that we want. So this insect is very specific to Japanese knotweed, and hopefully it is as successful as the cinnabar moth was in tansy ragwort. Mechanical controls, I think we're all pretty comfortable knowing about these. It's probably the first method a lot of us have gone to, the cutting, the burning, the pulling. So some of the basics we all know. I wanted to give a shout out to this really cool tool called the Uprooter. And there's a website called theuprooter.com that you can go to and buy these tools. These are made locally in Grants Pass by a really great family that does a lot of volunteer work. And these are fantastic tools for removing Scotch broom or other weedy species. Use mechanical advantage to grip the base of the plant and pull them out. It's a lot easier than just using your hands and your arms and your muscle strength and throwing your back out. Use the mechanical advantage of the uprooter, or sometimes they're called weed wrenches. Comes in different sizes, so you get a small one for the kids, get the full-size one, and pull out a lot of Scotch broom with the uprooter. Manual control, really the basics with, pulling things out by hand is great. Big thing we'll talk about with a lot of the different examples I'll get into is timing. You want to make sure that you're grabbing these things before they go to seed. So if they got seeds on them, then you got to deal with them, dispose of them often. This is a picture of a bag full of star thistle that I didn't get to on time along the river before those flowers had turned into seed heads. So I had to bag it up and get rid of it. So if you're able to get to things before that stage, you can save yourself the headache of having to bag things up. Mowing, again, timing is really crucial with mowing. I've heard some things about yellow star thistle timing with mowing is as soon as you see the very first flowers, if you can get out there and cut those yellow star thistle, the plant has put a lot of energy into growing up to that point. And if you've cut it right then, you've exhausted a lot of its resources. It might not be able to regrow, or if it does, it'll be very short and have many fewer flowers which means many fewer seeds are going out into your environment. So make sure that you're timing your mowing applications to be the most effective. I won't talk about chemical control here. I know that herbicides may not be for everybody, so I'll try to get through this relatively quickly. But for those of you that may want to resort to this, if you've got an invasive problem that you've tried all your other methods and those things are just not working, you might need to try herbicides. You want to be safe with them. You want to be safe for yourself. You want to be safe for the environment. So wearing the proper protective equipment, PPE, gloves, boots, and long sleeves are really the minimum. You can provide more protection with coveralls and a respirator if you feel like that's necessary. You want to be careful moving these materials around. You want to have a spill kit. Kitty litter works good. Should you happen to spill something, really want to avoid that, of course. But make sure that you've got a plan for cleaning things up in case something terrible happens. Then you want to be smart about storing those materials. They need to be in a cool, not too hot, not too cold, safe and secure and dry location. I need to emphasize that more is not better. You need to follow the label. The label has the recommendations of what rates should be used. Don't think that if the label says one amount, that if I double it, it'll be twice as good. You can often just top kill the top part of the plant without killing the roots. And then you have to go back the next year and spray it again. So you're just putting out more and more chemical in the environment. So go with the lowest rates possible. Low rates often are more effective because the slower the process takes to translocate the roots, the more root you're killing, and you won't have to go back and spray it again. You want to think about the right tool for the job. I like to add a blue dye to the mix because it helps me see exactly where I've sprayed things. If you accidentally spray over something and you've hit one of your desirable plants, you'll see the blue dye in it. Maybe you can cut that branch off and spare your desirable plant. And applying in appropriate weather conditions. It cannot be too hot, it can't be too cold. And then same thing with the mowing strategy. You want to do it within the right time of the plant's life cycle. Can't emphasize enough, you got to read the label. You need to know where you are, what type of habitat you're dealing with. Do you have sensitive species or water? Do you have animals who are going to be grazing the vegetation in the area? Do you need a license? Do you need permits? Know what type of weeds you're dealing with in terms of grasses or broadleaves or perennial woody vegetations. And that'll help tell you which herbicides are going to work on the target. Then you also want to choose the right surfactant, and that's the additives that help the solution stick. I want to talk real briefly about reading the label, and this is not an endorsement of this product, it's just an example. But the trade name or the brand name of this product is called Aquanid, but the main ingredient, the active ingredient, is glyphosate. That is the chemical. And this box down here shows you the warning level. Caution is slightly toxic, warning is moderately, and danger is highly toxic. And we're not going to be talking about any danger label herbicides. Those are restricted use herbicides. Those things require an herbicide applicator's license, even just to purchase them, much less apply. So we're not going to be talking about those. Going to be sticking to just general use pesticides. Those can be purchased by landowners. Essentially, if you're applying on your own property, you do not need a license. But if you're applying on anyone else's property, you probably do need a license, and you should consult the ODA pesticide licensing website for more information about licenses and requirements for that. Getting back to the label has a lot of information. It'll tell you which species this has been tested on and effective on. It'll tell you the rates and how much you should be using. And the label has all this information, and it is the legally binding document. It is the law. So the label tells you everything you need to know. Real briefly, want to go over glyphosate is something that we end up using a lot in natural areas because it breaks down relatively quickly. It is non-selective, meaning that it kills not only broadleaves, but it'll kill grasses. And it does that. Its mode of action is inhibiting amino acid production at the growing tips. There's a bunch of different products out there that have glyphosate in it. Some of those have an aquatic label, meaning that the EPA has deemed them safe and appropriate to use in and around water. Another chemical that I'll reference later in some of these talks is triclopyr. And unlike glyphosate, it is selective, meaning that it will not kill grasses, but it will kill most broadleaf plants. So if you're dealing with a broadleaf plant in a pasture or a meadow, this would be a potential choice, depending on if the label says it works on your target species. Its mode of action is mimicking a plant hormone called auxin. And there's different trade names there, which I've listed. Some of these, again, have aquatic labels, meaning you can use them near waterways or in waterways. And some you cannot, like Crossbow is a brand name that you often see on the shelves that is a triclopyr product, but it does not have an aquatic label. Real briefly, surfactants are the additive that helps your solution, your herbicide solution, stick to the plant. There's different kinds of herbicides or surfactants. There's emulsifiers, there's stickers that help it stick. There's penetrants that help it penetrate the leaf surface of the plant. So you need to do a little bit of research on that. I'm not going to get into the chemistry of it all, but I think that non-ionic surfactants are the best ones to use near water based on all the research I've done. There's some brand names listed there. So besides reading labels too, there's agricultural agents and staff at like the Grange, for example, that can tell you more about this. So consult experts if you have questions about these different products out there. Do your research, pick the best surfactant for the job. You do not need a lot of surfactant in your mix. 1% is enough, and that basically just means about an ounce to a gallon of water, to a gallon of your solution. And it's best to add that last to the tank mix. So you've got your water, you add your herbicide, then you add your surfactant, and ideally the blue dye, which helps show you where you've sprayed. Timing, again, not too cold. Plants are not going to be active when it's lower in the 50s. You definitely do not want to spray in a very hot day. I wouldn't even consider anything over 85 degrees because you can have volatilization, which is basically the plant or the herbicide can, if there's an air inversion, can move off of the target where it was sprayed, not just with wind, but with hot volatilization. So you obviously want to avoid windy days or wet days where you've got rain coming up. So mornings are typically good on a calm day where the temperatures are appropriate. And just a couple quick pictures to show you. This was a planting done in an area where you had a lot of weedy grasses in there. And this was sprayed on a day when it was not too hot. The grass around there will die back, allowing that planting to get more water down to its roots and hopefully grow up. But if this was done on a hot day, that planting, that small shrub, I'm sure would have been impacted by the herbicide. Here's me with the patch of my old friend Japanese knotweed. And again, I was really careful. I used that injection gun to get in there and was careful with spraying so that it didn't impact any of the willows, because the reason we're getting rid of that knotweed is that the native willows can thrive and not have so much competition. So making sure that you're doing it carefully is important. The timing within the plant's life cycle is also important. The plant should be green. Depending on the species, early in the season, you might not be achieving good results. Like I'm not spraying blackberries this time of year because the growth is just going up to the tips, and you might kill some of the leaves at the tips of the blackberry canes, but you're not getting any results down on the roots or the root ball. So you want to often wait for maturity. The key is often before the plants make their seed. And ideally, it depends on what the species are, but ideally before they make flowers too, because then you're not impacting pollinators potentially. So timing within the plant's phenology and timing within the season. Spring is going to be when the annuals are coming up. Summer is when we've got a lot of other species that start growing in spring, but they mature in summertime. And fall is a really good time for the blackberries and the woody plants because they're taking sugars and starches back down to their roots. So here's just an example using Dyer's wood. The picture on the left shows a rosette. That is, to me, the best time to use herbicides to spray, because you can use a small amount of herbicide and hit that target right there. You could still do it when it's molting, but it's already started to flower. So it could still work before it's gone to seed, but if there's seeds on there, don't spray it. You're already too late. You missed the boat. Same thing with a plant like thistle. I think it's really ideal to hit that early in the season, maybe even in the winter when you're starting to see these rosettes, because again, small amount of spray is going to zap that plant before it even bolts. But again, flowers turning into seeds, you're too late. So getting through monitoring, this is a picture taken in the same place. Photo monitoring is a really good way to see results. So this site here had teasel growing in amongst all these cottonwoods and rushes. And that T-post there in the picture showed me that I was taking my photo from the same spot a few months apart. And I could see that I successfully killed the teasel, and the rushes, the juncus is actually increasing. Here's another example of a Italian thistle outbreak where I sprayed it and went back about 6 weeks later or so and showed that I knocked it back and killed it. This is an outbreak of garlic mustard, and there's some poison hemlock in there as well. And I sprayed this site and I seeded in some native blue wild ryegrass, and this is what it looks like after the weeds are gone and the grass is growing. And because I could line up my photos each time with the landmarks, I'm able to see my progress. I know that what I was doing was being effective. So photo monitoring is a great way to go. I want to pause because I see there's stuff in the chat. So I want to see if I can figure out how to answer some of these questions perhaps real quick. Yes, uprooter, they work on blackberries. You can clamp it around the base of the canes and pull those out. Label gets the stuff. Blue dye is sold at a lot of different stores. Your Coastals or your Grange, there's often it's a little blue dye bottle. Blue wild ryegrass, that was a BLM site, so the Bureau of Land Management provided the ryegrass. But I'll talk about natives at the end. So,
I'll try to remember too. I'll see what you provide, Kyle, but I've got some resources for native plant material as well. But we'll see what you cover here. So
awesome. Oh, I should probably get going. So much more to cover. So
okay,
let's get cruising. Now we're going to get into the examples of some of these different weeds. So I want to talk a little bit about weedy grasses like cheatgrass, Medusa head. There's some good information out there on the web about that. But Medusa head is a real big problem in the Rogue Valley. It can come in through contaminated hay. Its seeds can travel on the wind, or you can track it in. So get to know what it looks like and make sure that if you see it in your pasture, you figure out how to deal with it right away. Sooner the better. If you are going to try mowing it, you're going to make sure you do it at the right stage, because if you've done it, if you mow it too late, you've missed the boat. Burning, I'm not going to talk about much because only some of us can pull that off. Hand pulling works great if you've got small amounts of it. So that early detection is important. Sprays can work on it. Some of these ones listed there will kill the grasses, and reseeding afterwards to provide more competition is a good strategy for Medusa head or other weedy grasses. This Techline News website has information about different sprays that can be used on Medusa head. UC Davis is probably the best resource though, because their Medusa head guide has tons of information. It really goes into the cultural control methods as well as the herbicides and different methods. So check out that UC Davis WRIC, ucdavis.edu. I'm actually helping a grad student from UC Davis study Medusa head here in the Rogue Valley. We set up some plots and I helped do the spraying of them. You can see my blue dye in the picture there to make sure that I was staying within the plot boundaries. And I don't have any results yet, but you can see that we've managed to knock back the Medusa head there, and she's going to try some different seeding methods. And so hopefully we'll have some more information at UC Davis when she finishes that study. Cheatgrass, a lot of the same methods I spoke about with Medusa head can be applied to cheatgrass. This is a real rapid growing grass, so spotting it early. The montanaweed.org website has a lot of good information on different herbicides, and timing of the applications is important for cheatgrass. Reed canary grass is something that I've done some work on, so I want to talk a little bit about that. It spreads not only by its rhizomes, but it produces lots of seeds, and this is one that gets into wetlands that can be very problematic. This is an area in Tolo Slough after we removed Gold Ray Dam. A lot of this ground was suddenly occupied by tons of reed canary grass, and we wanted to get willows established. So we tried a covering method where I went in there in the winter and put down this landscaping fabric and then staked in willows. And I'll talk more about willow staking at the end, but that was in part to try to get willows established. Let's make sure everyone's on mute. This is a picture after a few months have gone by where the black plastic was keeping down the reed canary grass, but the willows were starting to grow. And I thought, boy, I'm really onto something. This is really going to be great. Problem was I went back in August and the hot temperatures and the hot summers around here not only fried the reed canary grass that was underneath the tarp, but really baked those new roots that were forming of the willows. So I did not get very good willow survival using this method. So I think if I had to do it over again, I might do the covering or maybe even just go in there and spray and then go in and do some willow staking. So canary grass can be sprayed with different products. It can be covered. If you're going to do solarization or covering, you need to leave that material on there for at least a year. It's kind of a long-term plan because it's a real tenacious plant. It grows very thick and often around water. So be thoughtful of that when you're using herbicides, of course. Star thistle, we've talked about a little bit. So I want to cruise through some of these slides. We've got a lot of it in the Rogue Valley. It's pretty recognizable. So I think most of us have probably seen this one. Hand pulling works just great if you have a reasonable amount of it, but a lot of times it's been there for so long, or maybe you've inherited a property that's got a ton of it and it's gone crazy. So you might not be able to hand pull it. So you might want to think about mowing. The timing of it, again, right as those first flowers come up is peak time for mowing. Same time for spraying. You want to really do it right before the flowers, ideally. Different products that we mentioned, the glyphosates or the triclopirs can work. You often need to do repeat visits to this one. And this is a really great guide, again, through the University of California system. This is the Bible of Yellow Star Thistle Management. And if you just Google Star Thistle Management Guide, UC Davis or University of Cal, you can find this and get a PDF online. So knapweeds are pretty similar strategy to pretty similar in terms of the approach with yellow star thistle. You've got these rosettes. There's different kinds of knapweeds. They're all problematic. They're all non-natives and they're all weedy. They produce lots of seeds. They're originally brought here thinking that they could be good forage, but we've got plenty of other great choices for forage that don't dominate grasslands. So knapweeds, same type of thing. The timing is similar for, as I talked about for star thistle, same products work on that. You want to encourage competition. And really it's a matter of if you're going to spray them or cut them or pull them, you want to do it before those flowers have developed seeds. Dyer's woad. I don't know if everyone's heard of this one. This is another one of these weedy mustards. It is common throughout the West. It's starting to come in here in Southern Oregon. I'm seeing it more along the Applegate and the Rogue. Very unique seed shape. It's got a real unique teardrop shaped seed, which helps you identify it. There's a lot of plants with little yellow flowers, but if you see those seed heads, that's probably Dyer's woad. Starting to pop up now in April. May is when those flowers come up and start turning into seeds. So again, pull these guys out before the end of May and you won't have to bag up seeds, which was a problem here when I found this floodplain on the Rogue where everything is starting to turn into seeds. So it was a lot of bagging. Here's an example of a floodplain on the Rogue that I got to when it was flowering. So I could just pull those plants and just drop them and let the sun bake them and kill them before those flowers could make those seeds. The mature seeds that I just put up, the last picture in the upper right corner, are very delicate. So you got to be very careful when you're bagging them. Otherwise they'll fall down. So timing, early in the spring, early summer, later in summer, you're going to have to bag stuff up. Poison hemlock. This is a really good plant to know because it is poisonous, as the name would indicate. This is a European plant that is just a relative of the carrot. It has carrot-like leaves and small little white flowers, but the giveaway is that purple spotting on the stem, and the stem is pretty thick, thicker than your thumb, and plants can get to be about 8 feet tall. It is very toxic to not only animals, but people, so you do not want to ingest this. If you're dealing with it manually, you want to make sure that you're wearing gloves and long sleeves. Toxins can remain even in dried plants. One method for dealing with this without herbicides is to use a shovel and cut the taproot, so down at the base. But I like to, a lot of times if I'm getting the call to deal with this, it's because there's a huge outbreak of it. So I like to spray it as early as possible. These small plants, a small amount of very dilute herbicide solution can kill them before they've even got established. This time of year, it's starting to look like this, and a small amount of herbicide sprayed right in the center, that center shoot, is a good way to kill a plant, and you don't have to put a lot of spray out. So earlier the better. So learn how to identify this one early. Even at this stage, when it's about 3 feet tall, there's a lot of surface area for you to put spray onto, and it hasn't put up the flowers yet. So timing is crucial. If it has bolted and gone to flowers, even just using a machete or some sort of cutting implement to cut it down to make sure it doesn't make seeds is a good way to reduce the amount of plants that you have to deal with next year. Here's an example of where I was able to spray hemlock, getting the tip of my wand from my backpack sprayer down just an inch off the ground and hitting that base of the plant allowed me to kill, these are dead hemlock plants, without hurting these small Oregon ash trees that we had planted in here that were getting shaded out by the darn hemlock. Shiny geranium. I'm going to cruise through a few more weeds. This is a species that I'm seeing more and more of on the Rogue River on floodplains. It's very problematic in how fast it grows. There's a lot of different geraniums out there. This one has the bright red stems, little pink flowers. The leaves are shinier than some of our other geranium species. And so this one's starting to come up now. I was out working on this plant earlier today. You can see what it does in the understory. It just completely dominates. Its little seeds are just dust size and they can spread so rapidly. So this is a good one to get to learn. The Oregon State website has a lot of good information on it. So Google that or search for that and check that out. It shows you which other geranium species or lookalikes are out there. Some of these are also weeds. Geranium robertium or stinky bob is another one that's another weedy geranium species. So get to know what this one looks like. And if you've got small patches of it, you can pull it out. Make sure that you're doing it now in the next few weeks before those flowers have turned to seeds. If you've got tons of it, you might need to consider spraying it. And again, jumping at it early. Puncture vine is one we've got a little bit of time before this one pops up later in the summer. This one is from Northern Africa and it loves hot, hot weather. So it tends to pop up starting in July and growing through August and September. Really important to get to know this one, what it looks like, so that you can get it before these little tiny yellow flowers turn into these very, very sharp thorns. If you can identify it even without flowers or just at the point where it's gone to flower, you can avoid having these little spiky guys all over the place that you step on, and you can learn why it's called goat head because of the shape of the burr. You can pull these out. They're really small plants. They have a tiny taproot, and you can get rid of them before they've gone to seed. Low rates of spray will knock these out. The seeds live in the soil for about 3 years. So if you've got an area that has this, just be persistent and make sure that you've cleared it for 3 years running. And you can hopefully exhaust your seed bank. One tip that I have, if you have seeds, if you haven't identified and the seeds are already out there, is using some sort of foam pad, something that you can press onto the ground and get it onto that pad and scrape that off into a bucket or a garbage can and reapply that to the ground. Assuming it's a small area that you really want to make sure that you don't have those sharp seed heads. That's a method that I've occasionally employed. All right, let's get into blackberries because I think a lot of us have dealt with this plant. We love its tasty berries, but it's very problematic. This is a variety that's from the Armenian mountains. So it's from the Middle East, basically. It crowds out our native vegetation. I think we all are probably familiar with blackberries. So again, OSU extension page has a great article about it. But I'll just mention that really a great way to do it is just digging out those root balls. You can repeatedly mow it. Eventually you can exhaust its resources, but getting root balls out of the ground is really the best way to achieve the results that you're going to want for blackberry. And it can be fun, especially if you tell a joke to the person you're taking a picture of and snap a picture of them smiling. It can be fun. These berry vines, as you know, have thorns, so they fight back. So it's a formidable opponent there to deal with. But small patches, try different methods, repeated mowing or cutting or digging. If you've got a big infestation, you might need to consider using herbicides. And again, if you're near water or creeks, you're going to have to use a product that has an aquatic label. Low rates really can work well, and the timing is really important. Not this time of year, but really later in late summer or into fall. I often tell people to do an approach where you try to cut it around Memorial Day and spray it after Labor Day. So cut late May, early June, right up until they call fire season, where you can use implements to cut it. It's going to grow back, but by doing that cut in early June, it probably won't grow back fast enough to create new fruit. Fruit is obviously where seeds are. So it will expend a lot of its energy to regrow. And then that regrowth gives you a target to put spray onto, so that at the end of the year, you've managed to get the herbicides traveling back down into the roots and kill those big root balls. Same idea goes for poison oak. Now, I will mention poison oak is a native, but I know a lot of people do not like it and react to that urushiol oil that sometimes gives rashes to most of us. It reacts with our skin, but it's a woody plant. And so much like blackberry, you want to spray this a little bit later in the year. This time of year, the oil on those leaves is just starting to come out. If you're brave, or if you suit yourself up, you can hand pull it. But you need to be very careful, and just learning how to identify it is a good way to avoid it. Technu is also your friend if you do get involved with it. A lot of times poison oak is around a lot of the other weeds that I'm out there targeting. So I always wear long sleeves and pants and boots, but if I do get some on my wrists or my skin, washing up with this soap at the end of the day is a good way to get rid of the oils off your skin before it can cause the rash. And don't take a hot shower. Try using cold water right away, because it'll rinse off the oil before opening up your pores with hot water. So that's my tip for poison oak. I think the last weed I'm going to talk about is English ivy, and this is one that grows in our forested areas. It climbs up trees. It outcompetes so much of our native ground covers that it's really problematic. It didn't stick to the walls that we put it on in the first place. It'll grow to the top of a tree and eventually topple them and take them down. When it grows up to the top of the tree is when it actually creates its fruits as well. And birds like starlings or even hungry robins and things will eat those fruits, and then they'll fly somewhere and they'll poop that out, and the ivy berry can actually go through a bird's digestive system and start a new ivy plant somewhere. So you want to prevent ivy first from growing up the trees. So using hand pruners if they're small enough, or if you've got these old growth vines like this guy's dealing with here, you can use a handsaw and sever the vines growing up the tree. You don't necessarily have to peel it off what's above you, but it's ideal to pull what's on the ground below you. You can see this is an example of what we call a lifesaver ring, where you've cut the ivy from the base of the tree, ideally pulled the ground cover away from the base of the tree, and you should have saved that tree. The ivy will stop growing up there and stop making more fruit, but you might also have to deal with the ground cover. So back to my Nature Conservancy days, we actually tried a few experiments of spraying to see if we could spray ivy. And here's a plot. Here's a before picture and the after picture. We're able to kill it using sprays. Here's a couple more before and after pictures. This plot was pretty good. We actually had some native vegetation coming back in even after the spray. Once we've gotten the ground cover of ivy removed, the natives, that the seed bank in the soil popped up again. But really, I think the best method is just elbow grease and hand pulling and grubbing this out. And this is just a before and after picture where we cleared it out. And you can see afterwards we had a lot of native species coming in, like the false Solomon seals and the trilliums and other flowers and things were coming in. So getting a bunch of friends together and pulling out that ground cover ivy is an awesome way to do it. You'll see a huge response of native flowers coming back in. But it is difficult. So recruit help if you can. And I think that's about it for the weeds. I want to shout out some of the native plants real quick, and then we'll make sure we get some time for questions at the end. I think we're doing okay on time. OregonFlora.org is a really great website for plants of Oregon. You can go to the Explore tab right there and go to Grow Natives and find some really good resources for native species selections. And really want to talk about this because putting in competition of native species is a good way to replace your weeds with natives. Natives do well. So once again, OSU Extension has another great website about native plants and gardening with them. I'm going to take a drink while I let you read this list of native nurseries around the area. Probably not going to find a great selection of natives at the Home Depot or those big hardware stores, but some of these organizations or nurseries have really great selections of natives, so they'll give them some business. There's other areas too that will send stuff through the mail occasionally. So I just want to shout out Native Plant Society of Oregon is a really great resource. So plantnative.org. And there's a couple of other organizations listed there that have native species to Oregon or the Northwest. Just a few more slides real quickly. Selecting the right native for the right spot. Are you dealing with an upland site? Or are you dealing with a wetter riparian species? Is going to help you decide what plants you want to use. Since this isn't a native plant talk, I'm just going to blow through these slides pretty quick. But upland sites, here's a list of some species that you might consider that don't need quite as much water. But if you're dealing with a wetland area or a riparian area, you're going to want to consider things like willows and ashes and cottonwoods and spireas do really well around wetter areas. Real briefly, if you haven't heard of willow staking, it's a great way to make new trees. You simply cut existing willows that you have into sections, maybe 3 feet tall or 5 feet tall. You want to have them, about, I say about as wide as a Sharpie marker, maybe a thumb or bigger, and make an angled cut at the bottom and push that into the dirt as deep as you can. You want to get over half of it, ideally 2/3 of the length of that willow stake into the ground. And it's going to, and if it's in a wet area, it'll form roots and it'll form new branches. And you can, it's a real cheap way to get a lot of new trees established in wet areas. So willow staking is awesome. We use it in a lot of the projects we're doing along riparian areas. And then shady areas, ferns, oxalis, fringe cups are good for shady areas. So is thimbleberry, one of my favorite berries around here, or wild ginger. Sunny areas, I love Eriophyllum, the Oregon sunshine, which is on the left, or the native tarweed. The elegant tarweed is one of my favorites. I've put that in front of my house. I've got a mock orange in front of my house that the butterflies love. Milkweeds are, of course, great choices for monarch butterflies. So after you put in native plants, though, mulching the area, you're going to want to continue your weeding efforts until those natives get established and make sure that you're watering them. Really, the first summer is really crucial for watering native plants, maybe the first 2 summers. And after that, since they're used to this area, they should do okay without water. So just want to baby them through that first summer, make sure that they don't get scorched, and they should be off to the races and hopefully taking over land so that you don't have as many weeds. So closing up here, you want to set your goals, use the IPM methods, adapt as you go using information you learn from monitoring. If you are using chemicals, make sure you're being safe. using it in appropriate conditions. You want to set short-term goals, not allowing seeds to drop on your land. Set a long-term goal for year after year. A lot of times I tell people infestations might have taken 20 years to get to the point where you've come along and you find it. You might take 20 years to get it back. So you got to be persistent. These weeds sometimes have long living seeds, or they're just they're tough to get rid of. So make sure that you're patient in setting long-term goals, and restoring natives is a good way to get your landscape healthy so you can outcompete the weeds. So go kick some butt now that you got some of this information. I'm going to put my contact information up after this slide, where I promote a weed pull event that I would love folks to come spread the word about and join us May 18th on the Rogue River. We're meeting at Hog Creek down by Galice. We're going to pick up trash and pull weeds along the river. Starts at 8 o'clock, and at noon we'll have a lunch for everybody, free stuff and free food. So go to the Solve Oregon website or stream-smart.com. I'm going to have my contact information here. You can contact me later if we don't get to your questions answered here. And I'm going to turn it over to Rachel, and I'll check out the chat, and I'll put a few of my nature photos up on a slide here, and my contact info will come up at the end, I believe.
Okay, terrific. So much good information, Kyle. Really, really. Just.
Thank you. Klamath Siskiyou native seeds. I don't think I put them in that list. Yes. Klamath Siskiyou native seeds, another good local resource.
Yeah, if you want to just read through those questions, that's fine. There weren't, I think it sounds like that's what you're comfortable with, so that's totally fine if you want to go ahead and do that.
Okay. Yeah, let me go back.
There weren't
Yeah, cut poison hemlock at the base. That is a way to control it. If you use a shovel and sever the taproot, I think that's a really good way to knock it back, where your shovel is distancing yourself from the hemlock. Knapweeds are not really up right now. Grazing can kind of help. Knapweeds are really tough though. A lot of times it's getting your competition back. So either selectively pulling them out or spot spraying them out and seeding in desirable native vegetation. Flame torching. Oh yeah, if you could do flaming of shiny geranium, actually that makes a lot of sense, because this time of year we're not quite in fire danger yet. So that's a tool that a lot of times you can't use around here because we're just practically always in fire season, but not this time of year, not yet. So for early spring weeds such as shiny geranium, yeah, I love the idea of torching them. Tractor pull up, can remove the bulbs. Let's see. Percentage of chemical, percentage of active ingredient is different. Like the label we looked at, I believe that product is like 41% glyphosate. Whereas the recommendation might be, you might mix a 3% solution. So that's essentially 4 ounces of a solution to a gallon of water. So that's different. The label will have all that stuff. So I really got to stress, read the label. Arum, Italian arum. I'm glad you brought that up, because boy, that one really bugs me. I'd really love to see Oregon Department of Ag list that as a noxious weed, because it is escaping cultivation. It is a toxic plant, so be careful if you're hand pulling it. It has corms or little bulbs underneath the soil that you kind of need to dig them up, and you kind of need to dispose of all that material. It's really resistant to spray, unfortunately. So arum is one of these plants that I feel like is going to be a big problem, because I'm seeing it along the river, miles away from backyards where I'm sure it was planted. So Italian arum is also called lords and ladies, is one of the common names for it, and or candlestick plant. It has a really colorful flowering display and variegated leaves, but just beware that it is toxic. So make sure that you're gloved up when you're dealing with that one. Just be careful not to spread it. So don't like dig that up and like throw it in your compost or something like that. You actually need to dispose of that one. Vinca, kind of the same type of information I talked about. Ivy as a ground cover. Pulling it up in the winter time when the ground is wet is a really good time of year, because during the summer the ground locks up and it's too hard and you can't get the roots up. So I like pulling it in the winter or the spring. It has a waxy leaf surface, so spraying it, it's kind of difficult. It kind of sheds the spray, so you need to use particular stuff, and you might want to talk to an agent or a range person about that. Organic herbicides. So there are organic products out there. Didn't talk a lot about them. I don't use them very often, but there's like clove oils or capricolic acid and things like that that are listed as organic. Part of the reason I use some of these conventional products are that really low rates can achieve results. Like I mentioned, a 3% glyphosate solution can kill some of these plants, whereas a lot of the organic products, you need to use much higher rates. And even though they're organic, they're actually some of them can be somewhat dangerous for the user, for the applicator. The aromas and things like that, you don't want to be breathing those in. So I don't have a lot of experience with them, so I didn't really talk about them much. Rogue River cleanup event is in the chat, so check that out. Click that link and find out about the May 18th Rogue River cleanup. How soon after spraying? That really depends on the weed and the type of herbicide you're using. Depends on kind of what type of seed.
How soon after spraying can you seed, right? Was that that question? Yeah.
It sort of depends on there's so many factors with that one. So that one's tough to just give one answer for. In general, seeding should be done during the fall, winter, or spring. Ideally when there's going to be rain to help get that into the soil. So hopefully you can do your spraying before that. A lot of times it depends on the spray. It can be done shortly after, so within days. Cutting down leaves as they come up to deplete the corms of the Italian arum. I would think so. Don't have enough experience with that one. So, and dispose of, a lot of times if you've got noxious weed seeds, you don't want to put them into the compost or the yard debris bin, because it can just cause a problem somewhere else. So unfortunately, you need to put them into the landfill. Ideally, if you have a burn pile on your property, it's appropriate to do that. Burning them is another way to dispose of them. Just make sure that you're not spreading it somewhere else and making it somebody else's problem.
Yeah, sometimes when I'm doing it, I'll like have a dying stage to the disposal where I let them dry out, or if they're in a bag, I let them stay in the bag so that it just kills off all the material. So I know that it's not going to go in a landfill or the edge of a landfill or something like that and be sprouting.
Yeah. False brome is unfortunately common in the area. There is a lot of it. I started seeing it on the Illinois River like 15 years ago. I think it came in after the Biscuit Fire down there. I see it in some areas in the Rogue, but yeah, false brome is one of these weedy grasses that is a huge problem in the Willamette Valley, and we're starting to have it down here. Vinegar and salt, I hear a lot about that too, and that can work. I think that's something maybe to use for like, gravel driveway or whatever. I just want to point out that salt is not good for the earth. So even though it's just a household product that you might have around your house, doesn't necessarily mean that it's just generally safe. Same thing with vinegar. Vinegar is acetic acid, so it's an acid. So you also have to use high rates of that stuff. So there are household products, but and they will kill plants. So it's really not something you want to put out in a natural area, but for a driveway where you get tired of little things coming back, those sorts of solutions can work. Yeah, and I don't know much about horticultural vinegar and like for soil microbiology. I don't know what to make about the question. It's okay to burn toxic stuff. I was talking about burning just pulled plants, not necessarily sprayed plants. Seeds mature. Oh, and that might be about the arum again. Whoever's asked me about the arum, write down my email, and I can maybe talk to you more about that, because I'm still wanting to learn more about arum control. I'm going to close the chat and see if my pictures will keep cycling through. I thought it was on auto. Hey, there we go. So Rachel, am I out of time? Am I forgetting anything? How are we
Yeah,
doing?
no, that was great. We will, there were some questions about, I don't know if you have this in a PDF form. If it's possible, you can email that to me. I know you shared a link. I can get really huge things in my OSU email, but also maybe a list. And I think Anne said that she might compile a list of the resources. So we'll look into that. I'll also share, some lists that I have about native plant resources and things like that as well. But super great information. I was thinking as you were talking, it's kind of like, so many people are not in favor of herbicides. And I was thinking that this is a little bit like a birth control talk. It's like abstinence isn't the answer. Like we need to know how to use these in the best possible manner when we need to use them.
Yeah.
So
And yeah, if you rewind back 25 years ago when I first joined AmeriCorps, I think I would have told you you're crazy that I would become an herbicide applicator. It would just never enter my mind, but that finding out that Japanese knotweed just really couldn't be controlled on a landscape level allowed me to first start looking into that. And to me, it's really important that if you are going to use that you just do it as safely as possible and minimize the amount of it out there.
Yeah, it's such a gift. We're really, really lucky to have you working in this field and helping to educate about it as well.
It's a tool in the toolbox.
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
Sometimes not to liken it to something as serious as like cancer in people, but it's almost like you're resorting to like chemotherapy because the problem is so bad. You've tried all these other methods. Maybe you have to resort to something like that. So
yeah.
I just want to address a couple of questions I saw in the chat. The toxic plants. I guess if you're burning them, it depends. Don't breathe in that smoke. For example, poison oak. You could really cause a problem. So be very cautious about burning products like that, materials like that.
Okay, terrific. Thank you so much. I'll process the recording, get that out to folks in the next day or two, and I'll connect with you over email, Kyle. Thanks again.
Thanks, Rachel.
Really
Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Yep. Take care.
Good evening.